Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
After grinding for 15 goddamn years, 15 long, backbreaking, soul-numbing years of clawing my way through every financial disaster, every boardroom ego, every market collapse, and every mess my father left behind, I found myself sitting across from him at a pretentious steakhouse, watching him raise his glass like he was about to deliver some kind of victory speech. The wine was too expensive, the steak was overcooked, and the tension in my chest had been building for weeks. I should have known something was off by the way he kept avoiding my eyes, smiling just a little too smugly every time he glanced toward Samantha, who sat to his right in her usual designer dress, legs crossed, eyes blank but polished. The way she always looked when she had no idea what the hell was going on. He cleared his throat, one of those slow, theatrical gestures he always made when he wanted to make a point, and said, "Jessica, I've been doing a lot of thinking about the future." He paused there, letting it hang in the air like some heavy fog, as if I didn't already know he only thinks when he's about to screw someone over. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I looked at him, waiting, already bracing for the sting, though I didn't know how deep it would cut until the next words spilled out of his mouth like poison. "Samantha will be taking over the company," he said, eyes on me now, unblinking and unapologetic, like it was the most natural thing in the world to say. "You've done well, but you're just not leadership material." I swear to God, I didn't hear anything after that, not really. My ears were ringing, my heartbeat hammering so loud I could barely register the way Samantha's lips curled into that fake little smile she always wears when she's pretending not to gloat. And then, like the final insult, the ultimate cherry on top, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled $100 bill. He slid it across the white tablecloth like I was some damn waitress who'd just topped off his drink. "Here's for your trouble," he said, smirking, his voice so casual it almost broke me right there. I looked down at that bill like it was a dead thing. A goddamn $100. After 15 years of my life poured into his company, after sacrificing my 20s, burning through my marriage, waking up at 4 in the morning to save his ass from bankruptcy while he vacationed in the Bahamas, he thought $100 would square us. No thank you, no offer, not even a piece of the pie I baked from scratch. Just a tip. Like I was the help. And you know the worst part? I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table, didn't hurl my wine glass across the room like in the movies. I just looked at him. Looked at Samantha. Looked at that pitiful $100 insult. And I nodded. Quietly. Slowly. Like I'd just been handed some kind of sacred truth. Then I stood up. Took my coat. Walked out of that overpriced hellhole and didn't look back once. But here's the thing, what he didn't realize, what Samantha didn't even have the mental bandwidth to suspect, was that I had already made contingency plans. While they were sipping their Cabernet and laughing at their little coup, I had already started dismantling everything they thought was theirs. Piece by piece, quietly, surgically. You see, the thing about underestimating people like me is that we don't yell. We don't beg. We don't fight the way they expect. We just disappear. And when you wake up the next morning, you find that everything you once owned, everything you took for granted, is already gone. And now, let me ask you something just between us. Have you ever given everything for someone, poured every hour, every ounce of your soul into something they claimed was a shared dream, only to be tossed aside when it started to shine? Have you ever been betrayed by blood, humiliated by the people who were supposed to lift you up, not shove you down? What would you do if someone handed you $100 for stealing your life's work? Would you smile and walk away, or would you make damn sure they never forgot it? I didn't walk away because I was weak. I walked away because revenge is a dish best served cold, and I was already in the kitchen, prepping the feast. And while they toasted their new little power shift, while my father leaned back in his chair thinking he'd won some twisted game, I had already changed the rules. They just didn't know it yet. They would. Oh, they would. But not tonight. Tonight, I'd let them sleep easy, just one last time. People like my father always forget the labor that happens in the shadows, the kind of work that leaves your hands cracked, your spine aching, and your soul slowly thinning out under the weight of other people's failures. He never remembered the nights I spent curled up on a folding cot in the back office, wearing the same shirt for the third day in a row, because there was no money for staff overtime, and if I didn't stay, everything would have collapsed. He never thought about how many mornings I sat in the car outside the warehouse, swallowing dry coffee and silent tears before stepping in with a fake smile and a head full of broken numbers I had to somehow make work. When I say I rebuilt Vaughn Industries from the ground up, I mean it in the most literal, blood and bone sense. The place was a crumbling, debt-choked disaster when he handed it to me, not as a vote of confidence, but more like a cruel joke, a test he never expected me to survive. He called it an opportunity, but what it really was a death trap wrapped in a bow, passed off to me because everyone else had already walked away or run for the hills. He thought I'd quit. He thought I'd drown. But I stayed. God help me, I stayed. I worked 16-hour days for years, sometimes longer, with no holidays, no weekends, no safety net. I poured every cent I had into payroll when our accounts froze, maxed out my personal credit cards to keep the electricity running, begged vendors to hold off another 30 days because I knew if we could just land that next contract, I could pull us out. I wasn't some cushy executive hiding behind spreadsheets. I was the one crawling under machinery to fix it myself because we couldn't afford a repair crew. I was the one driving cross-country in a rented van to pitch in person to clients who wouldn't return our calls. I was the one chasing invoices, cleaning bathrooms, rewriting the goddamn website by hand when the IT guy bailed. Meanwhile, my father was on his yacht. Literally. Sending me smug emails from the Caribbean while I sat at my desk eating stale vending machine crackers because we'd cut the snack budget again. He liked to say he trusted me to handle things, but what he really meant was, you deal with this mess while I sip bourbon on the deck and pretend I'm still the genius behind it all. And somehow, through all that chaos and grit and sleepless nights, I did it. I built something real. I turned our zero-balance ledger into a multi-million-dollar cash flow. I rebuilt trust with clients who swore they'd never work with us again. I brought in top-tier talent and mentored them personally. I took a dying beast and made it breathe again, no thanks to him, and certainly not to Samantha, who couldn't even spell EBITDA without a cheat sheet. You want to know what Samantha contributed? She showed up at fundraisers in cocktail dresses, took selfies with the board members, and smiled through meetings like a polished mannequin. She never read a single earnings report, never sat through a supplier negotiation, never once rolled up her sleeves for anything beyond her spray tan. And yet, somehow, when things turned profitable, when the hard part was over, she was suddenly ready to lead. That's what burns the most, isn't it? The way some people show up for the photo finish and get handed the medal while you're still coughing up blood from the first lap. She never earned a damn thing, but she got the crown because she was shiny and soft-spoken and knew how to laugh at Dad's stupid jokes without challenging his ego. That's all it took. Not work. Not sweat. Just compliance. I sacrificed more than time and money. I sacrificed parts of myself I'll never get back. My marriage died somewhere in those years, quietly, like a candle that runs out of wax. My ex used to say, I feel like I'm married to your job, and I used to laugh it off, until one day he wasn't joking anymore. He packed his things while I was on a business trip and left a note on the kitchen counter that said, I hope this company loves you back. But it didn't. Not really. It used me. My father used me. And when there was nothing left to take, he discarded me like yesterday's paperwork. The irony is that I never wanted the throne. I never needed the applause. I just wanted respect, acknowledgement that I mattered beyond being a temporary fix. But he never saw me as a partner. He saw me as a placeholder, a workhorse, a tool. And when it came time to hand over the keys, he picked the one who hadn't lifted a damn finger, just because she fit better into his image of a legacy. But here's the thing he forgot. Every spreadsheet, every contract, every major account, every client contact, every operating procedure, it ran through me. I didn't just manage the engine, I became it. And when you strip the engine out of a car, it doesn't matter how shiny the paint job is, it's not going anywhere. I wasn't just angry that night at dinner. I was prepared. I had seen it coming. I had made my peace with it long before he said the words out loud. But what they didn't know What they couldn't possibly understand is that when I nodded and walked out, I wasn't leaving the company. I was taking it with me. I didn't cry in the parking lot, didn't call a friend to vent, didn't even scream in my car with the windows rolled up like some heartbroken teenager after a bad date. I just drove, steady and silent, my hands stiff on the steering wheel, my jaw locked so tightly I could hear my own teeth creaking. There was no soundtrack of sadness, no rain on the windshield, no slow motion moment of emotional collapse. It was just me, the road, and a white-hot clarity in my veins that I hadn't felt in years. By the time I hit the freeway, I already knew exactly what I was going to do. There was no hesitation, no doubt, no hesitation flickering in the back of my mind whispering warnings. Just calm, focused intent. The kind that comes only when someone finally pushes you too far, past the point of forgiveness and straight into something colder, sharper, irreversible. I drove straight to the office. It was almost midnight by the time I pulled into the back lot, headlights cutting through the fog like a scalpel. The building stood there like it always had, familiar and hollow, a place I had poured more of myself into than any home I'd ever lived in. I parked in my usual spot, the one with the faint oil stain I'd never bothered to clean, and walked up to the side entrance. My keycard still worked, of course. My father might have had the arrogance to crown Samantha at dinner, but he hadn't bothered revoking my access. Not yet. He assumed I'd go home and sulk. He assumed I'd eventually come back and accept some lesser role, tail between my legs, grateful for scraps. That's what he always assumed, that I'd keep coming back. That I'd stay loyal even when he made it clear I was expendable. What he forgot was that I still held all the digital keys. I had built the internal architecture from the ground up, every server, every access portal, every shared file system, every automated report pipeline. I didn't just manage operations, I coded half of them. I had administrator clearance, and I knew the company's infrastructure better than any IT director we ever had, because I had handpicked and trained most of them myself. And I had been quietly preparing for this moment for years, not because I expected it, but because I knew people like him don't hand over power without a knife hidden behind their back. You don't survive in a family business without learning how to carry your own blade under your coat. Inside the office, everything was quiet. The motion sensors clicked on the lights in waves as I walked down the corridor, past the framed photos of company milestones, the ribbon cuttings, the trade shows, the press releases. My name was never on those plaques, never in those headlines, but I had written half the speeches and closed every deal behind the scenes. I went straight to the server room first, bypassed the biometric lock with my emergency override code, one of those little tricks I'd tucked away years ago, just in case. Then I got to work. First, I disabled every superuser account except one, mine. I encrypted the internal dashboards and locked out key personnel from back-end systems. I redirected administrator logs to a separate hidden server and wiped all recent changes from the audit trail. Then I transferred sensitive client files, contracts, forecasts, deliverables into a secure, encrypted vault linked to a shell corporation I had quietly incorporated 2 years prior. Vaughn Strategic Consulting, LLC. A harmless name on paper, but the foundation of everything I was about to reclaim. That company had its own infrastructure, its own email domains, its own CRM platform. I had slowly mirrored everything we used in the main business, cloned it piece by piece over time like someone building an ark in the backyard while the neighbors laughed at the lack of clouds. Before I finished, I voided my own access, at least. That's what it would look like on the surface. But before cutting my digital ties, I embedded a series of internal triggers, fail-safes, timed scripts, reroutes that would quietly detonate once certain systems were accessed by unauthorized users. Nothing destructive. Nothing illegal. Just enough to make the entire infrastructure glitch, stall, and reroute, all in my direction. I wasn't burning the house down. I was just quietly packing up the furniture and changing the locks. By the time I closed my laptop and walked out of that building, the heart of the company no longer lived inside those walls. It lived in a private cloud under my control, surrounded by ironclad legal protection and designed with the kind of precision only a bitter, betrayed woman could achieve. And it was all perfectly legal. Every loophole, Every redirect, every transfer was covered by clauses my father had signed years ago without reading, trusting his little workhorse daughter to handle the fine print. I had written those contracts, built those loopholes, laid every trap and springboard myself. He thought he was clever, but he'd spent too long playing checkers while I was mapping out the chessboard. When I walked out into the cold night air, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. I felt something deeper, something quieter, a stillness, a certainty, like a blade returning to its sheath. I didn't need fireworks or fury. I just needed time. When he walked into the office the next morning, coffee in hand and self-satisfaction still radiating off his starched collar, he still thought I was the failure. He still thought Samantha was his rising star, his legacy incarnate. He had no idea that the real company, the contracts, the clients, the infrastructure, the leverage, had already slipped through his fingers like sand. That didn't last long. By Monday morning, the office buzzed with the usual artificial calm, that corporate gloss that masks tension with polished smiles and too strong coffee, but underneath it all there was a current already shifting, something subtle, something wrong, something no one could quite name yet. My father strutted through the glass doors like a king returning to his throne, smug and oblivious, convinced that today would be the start of a new dynasty, one where Samantha, freshly anointed and thoroughly unqualified, would assume her place as the new face of Vaughn Industries. He wore his best suit, the deep navy one he always reserved for dramatic reveals, and walked through the hallway like he expected applause to erupt with every step. His secretary smiled too wide. The junior executives murmured congratulations. Samantha followed behind him, heels clacking a little too loudly, a little too nervous under her coat of confidence, but trying her best to mirror the grandeur of the moment. He had even scheduled a staff-wide meeting that morning, a ridiculous dog and pony show to introduce Samantha as the next chapter, the future of the company. He probably spent the weekend rehearsing his speech in the mirror, practicing the exact tilt of his chin, the cadence of his voice, how he would say something dramatic like, "Fresh vision meets timeless values." But none of that happened. Because before he could step onto the little platform they'd set up in the conference room, before the first slide even flickered onto the projector screen, the first calls started rolling in, short, sharp, frantic calls from major clients, longtime partners, trusted accounts that had formed the backbone of our quarterly revenue for the last 6 years. And they were not calling with congratulations. They were confused. They were alarmed. They were asking why they were being contacted by a new firm, by Vaughn Strategic Consulting, to be precise, offering to manage their portfolios, holding identical documentation, referencing proprietary files that should have only existed within our internal systems. Clients wanted answers, and they wanted them now. Some of them were furious. Some were already demanding contract reviews. Some, worst of all, were starting to transfer their business outright without waiting for explanations. Within 20 minutes, the IT department descended into full-blown panic. Dashboards weren't responding. Internal servers were cycling errors. System logins were blocked, access credentials rejected, entire departments cut off from data they used every day. Someone tried to reboot the main CRM platform, only to find the administrator account had been wiped clean, replaced with encrypted access paths that no one could trace. The head of cybersecurity stood in the hallway scratching his head like a man who just realized his house had been robbed from the inside without a single window broken. Then came the legal department, stumbling in with piles of alerts from compliance software, dozens of triggered NDAs, revised contract versions signed and filed, complete with digital signatures dated weeks ago, but somehow never flagged until now. My father, for all his bluster and bravado, could only stand there blinking, muttering half-sentences and demanding answers no one could give. The staff meeting was canceled before it even began. Samantha tried to step in, tried to explain something, anything, but the words came out like fragments, empty jargon she barely understood. She fumbled numbers, misquoted figures, talked in vague, useless terms like synergy and market repositioning, while the senior sales team stared at her in stunned silence, realizing for the first time just how hollow her qualifications really were. Someone asked her about Q4 projections, and she stared at the floor. Someone else asked about client retention metrics, and she answered with some nonsense about positive brand perception, which wasn't just the wrong answer, it wasn't even in the same universe as the right one. The company was hemorrhaging from 10 different wounds, and she was standing there trying to fix it with a smile and a buzzword. People started whispering. I started shifting toward the closed door of the executive wing, the place where decisions used to get made, the place where I used to sit, the place that now echoed with silence because the one person who understood how everything worked was no longer there. I hadn't said a word. I hadn't sent a single email or made a single announcement. I didn't need to. The systems were speaking for me now. The triggers I'd embedded were doing their job, one glitch at a time, one reroute after another, and my father was finally starting to understand that he wasn't in control of anything anymore. I was sitting in my own office by then, in a different building, far from the chaos, sipping black coffee and watching the fallout unfold in real time from a private dashboard only I could see. Every client who called in confusion had already received a welcome packet from my new firm. Every project Vaughn Industries lost was one I had already transitioned to Vaughn Strategic Consulting. The infrastructure they thought they owned had already been duplicated, streamlined, and branded under my name. I hadn't just stolen their foundation, I had replaced it. And then, just after noon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered without a word, letting the silence stretch until his voice finally broke through the line. My father sounded smaller than I'd ever heard him. Shaken. Uncertain. He didn't even bother with pretense. What did you do? He asked, his voice tight, low, strained with the weight of everything he didn't understand. I smiled. Not that he could see it, but I smiled anyway, slow and quiet, because that moment was the one I'd waited years for. Oh, Dad, I said softly, you still think you're in charge. People always assume revenge is loud, that it crashes through doors with fury, burns everything to ash, leaves scorch marks you can point to and say, there, that's where it all ended. But the truth is, the most brutal revenge is quiet. It doesn't make a scene. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't ask for recognition. It simply takes everything you value and makes it vanish without a trace, leaving you standing in a room full of trophies that don't mean a damn thing anymore because there's no one left who remembers what they were for. My father thought I'd come back begging, that I'd grovel for a second chance, maybe offer to assist my sister while she learned the ropes. He probably expected me to tailspin, to flail in some dramatic display of wounded pride. But I didn't scream. I didn't sue. I didn't even try to prove anything. I just quietly erased his empire and rebuilt it under my name. Not by burning his down, but by making mine better, smarter, faster, leaner, and more valuable to the clients he'd spent decades ignoring while he puffed up his ego at charity galas. I didn't sabotage the company. I didn't destroy it. I simply outgrew it. I outpaced it. I built a version of it that didn't need his old name to carry weight, that didn't rely on his legacy to open doors, because those doors were already opening for me before he ever noticed. Vaughn Corp became a shell, not through scandal, not through collapse, but through irrelevance. And I didn't have to twist a single knife. I just left the room, and the clients followed me out. Most of them didn't even ask questions. They didn't care whose name was on the damn building. They cared about results. They cared about trust. They cared about the person who picked up the phone at 2 in the morning when a deal was falling apart, the one who had walked them through mergers and shutdowns and market crashes without blinking. That person wasn't my father. It was never Samantha. It had always been me. They knew it, even if he didn't. So when Vaughn's Strategic Consulting introduced itself, they didn't hesitate. They knew the voice on the other end. They knew who had built their success. And they knew exactly where they wanted to go next. Legally, everything I did was airtight. Every client transfer was signed and sealed under clauses he never bothered to understand. Clauses I had written into contracts years ago when I was still the only one bothering to read the fine print. It wasn't corporate theft. It wasn't even manipulation. It was simply preparation. Every account that moved had the right to do so, Every consultant who left with me had non-competes that expired years ago. Every system I built under his roof, I'd already mirrored elsewhere, privately, meticulously, under a separate entity that existed in full compliance with every regulation he'd never cared enough to learn. I didn't need to take him down. I just needed to give people a better option and make sure I was the one offering it. You know what really guts men like my father? Not noise. Not conflict. Not lawsuits or tantrums or ugly public feuds. What kills them is silence. Indifference. The slow, invisible evaporation of relevance. The moment when they realize the empire they thought they ruled is still standing, but nobody's inside. The building's there, the staff is there, the name is on the door, but the soul of the business is gone, and it followed the one person they never respected. It was never about vengeance. It was about freedom. It was about finally stepping out from under his shadow and showing the world and myself that I was never just the daughter. I was the architect. And architects don't need permission to build something better. They just need space. Now Von Corp sits like an abandoned stage, the lights still on but the performance long over. The clients are gone, the contracts are empty, and all that remains are the hollow echoes of a man who still thinks legacy is something you can impose by bloodline. Meanwhile, my new firm grows by the day. Every week we sign new partnerships. Every month our profits rise. Every corner of the market that used to belong to him now bears my signature. And here's the twist no one saw coming. I didn't just build a new company. I built one that offers consulting services tailored specifically to second-generation businesses struggling with outdated leadership models. Which means, in an exquisite twist of irony, every lesson I learned from watching my father fail at modernization now fuels a business that helps others avoid becoming him. He's not just obsolete, he's become my case study. But the final blow wasn't financial, and it wasn't even professional. That's what he still doesn't understand. I could have stopped there. I could have walked away, rich, respected, and untouchable. But there was one last thing I needed to do, something not for profit, not for strategy, something personal. And he never saw it coming. There's a particular kind of satisfaction that comes not from shouting your triumph across rooftops or slamming your enemies into the dirt, but from watching them slowly, silently realize that everything they thought they controlled was never really theirs to begin with. It doesn't need a grand finale, no champagne, no dramatic confrontation in a boardroom with security guards and shouting executives. Sometimes, the most devastating move is the one made without raising your voice, the one where you don't even have to stay in the room to win. It happened on a Tuesday, quiet, simple, unassuming. I called Samantha and asked her to meet me. Not at a boardroom, not at the office, not at some over-polished lunch spot downtown where she could feel important in front of people who didn't know better. I picked a small cafe near the river, the kind of place where people mind their own business and the coffee isn't overpriced for the sake of ambience. I didn't need theatrics. I needed her to see the truth without the cushion of her illusions. She showed up dressed for power, of course, heels too high, blazer too tight, voice a little too chipper, trying to posture like she was still in control of something. I let her do the dance for a while, let her talk about how things were stabilizing at the company, how they were handling the client loss, how Dad just needs time to recalibrate strategy. I nodded, listened, smiled when it was polite to smile. And then I handed her the folder. Simple, black, no logos, no drama. Just paper. Paper that changed everything. Inside were the legal documents she'd never seen. The registration details, the acquisition files, the contract redirections, all filed and clean and untouchable. All pointing to one fact she couldn't deny. Vaughn's strategic consulting didn't just exist, it owned everything she thought she was running. Every account, every license, every major asset worth a damn now flowed through the entity I had built. The old company wasn't dead, it was just empty. And the crown she thought she was wearing wasn't gold. It was paper, held together by tape and denial. Her face changed slowly as she read. Not a sudden drop, not a gasp, but a gradual crumbling. You could see the gears trying to spin, trying to catch up, trying to process a reality that refused to fit into her narrative. She looked up at me with those big, confused eyes that always managed to deflect accountability, the same look she used as a child when she broke things and expected someone else to clean up the mess. "So, you're my competitor now?" she asked, voice thin, almost hopeful. I shook my head once. "No," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'm your boss." She didn't understand at first. I had to explain it slowly, like untangling a knot she didn't even know was there. The family shares I had quietly acquired over the years, through small, subtle agreements, through buybacks, through dormant trust allocations she never paid attention to, gave me a controlling interest. And I had already rewritten the bylaws, months before she even knew there was a power shift happening. The vote had already been held. The board had already spoken. Dad was out. Permanently. No reinstatement. No advisory position. Nothing. Samantha, on paper, was the CEO, but a CEO with no control, no power, no decision-making authority. Just a title. Just a nameplate. Just a puppet. And me? I had already walked away from the table. I didn't need a seat anymore. I had built my own. I didn't need to manage her. I didn't need to monitor the company. I didn't even want it. I had already taken everything I needed and left her holding an empty shell, a legacy she never earned, never understood, and would never grow into. And that was the final move, not to stay and gloat, not to punish her or my father with public humiliation, but to let them rot in the structure they clung to, while I moved on and built something better without their noise. I didn't return to the office after that. Not even once. I didn't check the reports. I didn't answer the calls. I didn't watch as Vaughn Corp crumbled further or as Samantha flailed beneath the weight of responsibilities she could never carry. I didn't need to. The damage wasn't in the numbers, it was in the silence, the vacuum I left behind, the absence they didn't know how to fill. My father, from what I heard, sits alone now in his corner office. He refused to vacate it, even after the vote removed him officially from the company's leadership. He kept his desk, his nameplate, the leather chair that squeaks slightly when he leans back. He stares at the same window he used to think meant something, a symbol of power and presence. But the phones don't ring like they used to. The emails don't come. The board doesn't ask for his opinion. He's a relic now, still there, but hollow, out of time, out of place, out of relevance. And sometimes, I'm told, he picks up that old photo from his desk, the one of me at age 8, missing teeth and wearing a handmade school science fair ribbon. He used to keep it there as a joke, a reminder of how nerdy I was, how I used to take everything too seriously. Now he looks at it for something else. Regret, maybe. Or realization. Maybe he finally understands what he threw away, what he never saw coming. Maybe he finally sees that the little girl he thought couldn't lead was never meant to follow in his footsteps, because she was always walking ahead of him, even when he wasn't looking. He thought I wasn't leadership material. And in a way, he was right. I wasn't made to lead his way. I wasn't made to echo his decisions or carry his ego forward. I was made to build, to create, to innovate and walk away, leaving ruins for others to sit in while I broke new ground elsewhere. Revenge doesn't always look like fire and fury. Sometimes it's just silence. The kind that echoes forever in a room that used to hum with power, but now just holds dust and old memories. So tell me, was I right to do it? Or did I become the very thing I swore I wouldn't? I'll let you decide. But either way, I'm not looking back.